Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my great pleasure to invite you to this, our May Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We live in interesting times. You all may have heard the story that ran on campusreform.org, our very popular website, that at East Carolina University, a professor in the run-up to the graduation sent emails to all of the graduates who were each entitled to have a statement of 35 words said as they got their degrees, that you're hereby forbidden to mention God in that 35 words that you are allowed to write. And it caused quite a sensation, and I'm happy to report to you that in today's Washington Times, there's a story that reads, "School annuls professor's ban on grads thanking God." This is East Carolina University in North Carolina. It's another indication of the impact that your Leadership Institute has. The campusreform.org has really begun to have considerable influence. I encourage you all to live tweet today's event, if you are equipped to do that. The hashtag is WWCB, and it's displayed here on the screen. Live tweet at Leadership Institute, hashtag WWCB. In 2014, the Leadership Institute's already trained 2,728 students nationally and 1,478 students internationally, and we've held 46 trainings representing 17 of our 41 types of schools. And since 1979, the Leadership Institute has trained a total of 144,406 students. You have before you at your table the schedule of schools currently scheduled in 2014. I urge you to take a look at that goldenrod piece of paper, review the schools that are currently scheduled, and consider attending one or sending a friend to the training. And now I introduce to you Peter Ildefonso, who will offer an invocation and lead us in a pledge of allegiance. Peter is the Leadership Institute's web and database programmer. He graduated from Clemson University in South Carolina and serves as the treasurer for the Arlington Falls Church Young Republican Club. Peter?
Please bow your heads. We have learned that at times life can be as hard as steel. Like the ever-flowing waters of the river, life has its moments of drought and its moments of flood. Like the ever-changing cycles of the season, life has its soothing warmth of its winters and the piercing chill of its winters. But you, Lord, can transform dark and desolate valleys into sunlit paths of inner peace. Lord, help us in our transformation and our mission to bring sunlit paths of peace to this great nation. Bless the food and guests we have here today. Continue to bless us with a vision for success. And please bless all of those who make this possible. We ask all of this in your Son's name, Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Peter. And now I present Amanda Anderson, who will give a brief programs report. Amanda is our director of events here. She graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and previously worked on Ron Paul's 2012 presidential campaign as the Youth for Paul operations coordinator. Amanda, I don't know if I ever told you this, but back in the 1970s, one of Senator Jesse Helms' strong supporters and I were having a conversation, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill came up, and that hardcore conservative said that if the Lord does not destroy Chapel Hill, he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology.
Yes, Morton, you have told me that story before. Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming. I am so delighted that so many of you are here this morning. I am pleased to invite you all to this year's 43rd National 4th of July Conservative Soiree. To give you a taste of what this year's patriotic celebration will be like, here is a quick preview. Okay, there is still time to sponsor this year's event, so please visit leadershipinstitute.org/soiree for more information and to RSVP. Thank you so much.
Now I present to you Christopher Doss to introduce our outstanding speaker. Chris Doss is Deputy Director of the Institute's Grassroots Department. He received our 2013 Employee of the Year Award. Working almost every weekend, Chris personally taught 2,268 of the 10,062 total students the Leadership Institute trained domestically last year. Chris Doss.
Thank you very much. Before we leave the subject of Jesse Helms, when I was studying at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the North Carolina legislature was debating allocation of money to put a state zoo in Asheboro. Jesse Helms said he didn't see why they needed to allocate money to build a zoo in Asheboro. All they needed to do was put a fence around Chapel Hill. So, a wise man. Oh, a wise man. Now, who is this baseball player from Kentucky who's come to Washington? Many think he's something exciting and novel, and he has managed to excite a lot of grassroots conservatives and young people who come into politics and into the Republican Party. And I'll grant you, he's brought a lot of excitement into the party. But how novel is he really? I'm going to disabuse you of that notion that he's all that novel. I'm going to read you some excerpts from a message from my distant political past, an icon. No, not John C. Calhoun. Not quite that far back. This message didn't get its speaker, didn't get the intended object of its speaker into the White House, but it propelled the speaker himself into a successful political career. I want you to compare the thoughts of this speaker with what you've heard on television, on the radio, what you've read of Rand Paul. And I quote, "This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that an intellectual elite can plan our lives better than we can plan them ourselves. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. When a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. Outside its few legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector. We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without concluding that the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one. So they're going to solve all the problems of human misery through government and government planning. Well, if government planning and welfare had the answer, shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year in the number of people needing help? But the reverse is true. Each year the need grows greater, the program grows. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself. Government programs, once launched, never disappear. A government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth." End of quote. Is the message of limited government really so novel? Is the message of free market economics really so radical? But I don't think there's any question that this message resonates with people who are sick and tired of Washington. So let's hear the version of a baseball player from Kentucky. Let's welcome Dr. Rand Paul.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hate to pile on Amanda's alma mater, but, you know, I spent 7 years at Duke, and the only cheer I remember was "Go to hell, Carolina, go to hell." So, but I guess one conservative came out of Chapel Hill, so that's good. That's good. I know I may be overdressed today, but I came straight from baseball practice, and we're working very hard this year. The Democrats beat us 27-0 last year. Okay. And so my colleagues are convinced if we just practice harder, we can win. And I'm convinced that maybe if we kidnap their pitcher on the way to the ballpark, we might win. They have a 32-year-old pitcher who played AAA baseball, you know, who's just a great pitcher and still young enough that he still has an arm. And so come and wish us well, but I'm not holding my breath about our baseball game. In fact, last year I told him, I said, look, you Democrats, you love regulation so much. Why don't we have a regulation that says your pitcher can only pitch for 2 innings? But you know what? Not one of them is taking me up on that regulation. So any of you who are at the Leadership Institute currently are wondering, well, what will I do or where will I go? I want to introduce somebody from my staff who came here and did two courses, Brian Darling, and then went on to Heritage, and now is my general counsel. I always tell people that I think there are 2 arguments when people say, well, why are you for limited government? Or why are we for minimal government? One, it's because we're for maximizing freedom. But there are really sort of 2 arguments for why you want minimal government or why you want to minimize government. One is the liberty argument and one is the efficiency argument. The liberty argument, I think, comes out of what Thomas Paine said. Thomas Paine said government is a necessary evil. And boy, that's enough to scare people that, boy, this is a radical. Government is a necessary evil. But when you think about it, for every ounce of government you get, you give up an ounce of freedom. And that doesn't mean that government, we can't go with, we can have no government. We do have to have some government. There is a role for government. We need a national defense. Let's see. There's something, isn't there something else? A judiciary, a legislature. You know, there could be a lot less things that government does than they do currently. But the thing is there is a role for government. So we do pay taxes. We give up some of our labor. But we give up some of our freedom to have government. So we should always look at every opportunity and everything that we are asked whether government can do this as giving up of freedom. So we give up some freedom to have a national defense. We give up a little freedom to have roads and universities, things like that. There are some things we're going to spend money on, but we should always minimize it because we're giving up some freedom. The other argument is what I call the efficiency argument, and I think Friedman put this best when he said that nobody spend somebody else's money as wisely as they spend their own. And that's just sort of a truism that, think about it. Do you think a politician cares when he gives $534 million to Solyndra and it goes belly up? No, but if it was his or her money, they might care about it. It could be a dollar, $10 million, $100 million, or $1 billion. It's all the same when it's not your money. So there is an efficiency reason for not giving it up. Because government, it's not that government's inherently stupid, although it's a debatable question. It's just that government doesn't get the same signals. If I borrow money and I have a business that goes, you're going to worry about it. You're going to feel inside, I got to make my mortgage payment. I got to make my payroll. I've got to make a profit. I've got to have food on the table for my kids. And so you will make good decisions. If you don't, you'll be out of business. And so really capitalism maximizes that, but it's because you have to make a profit. Government doesn't have to, so government will always be inefficient. Why are we surprised when government doesn't do things well? And at every turn, we find that government doesn't do things well. Now, we've had some trouble, with the Republican Party winning. We're doing pretty well in the House of Representatives because, the districts are drawn and we can draw up districts that we're winning. But we're having more trouble winning Senate races, whole states, and quite a bit of difficulty winning, nationally. And so we do have to sort of rethink how we present our message. And there's two competing influences, and Morton's in the belly of the beast often with the Republican National Committee, trying to figure out which way we go. Some say let's dilute our message. All we have to do is if we become Democrat light and we act more like the Democrats, if we become more moderate, we'll win more elections. I think it's actually kind of the opposite. I think we need to be more bold in what we actually believe in. What passes for bold on Capitol Hill is, we're for revenue neutral tax reform. It's like, give me a break. If that's what we're for, I'm going home. I really don't care whether Mr. Smith pays a little less and Mr. Jones pays a little more or Mrs. Jones pays a little more. Simplification's good, but really isn't enough to motivate me to get off my couch, run for office, and come to Washington. Why don't we boldly be for what we were for, what we have been for, which is the basic part of our messages. Maximizing freedom, which means lowering taxes, lessening the burden of government, and maximizing how much you get to keep of your own labor. The thing about it is we should express this in a way that says, you know what, the Democrats are always for a stimulus, a government stimulus. Why don't we be for a stimulus also? But let's be for a free market stimulus that says you keep more of your own money. I go around Kentucky and I say, you know what, you want Kentucky to be richer? You want Louisville to prosper more? Leave more money in Louisville. Leave more money that was earned in Louisville. But that means we have to boldly be for lowering taxes, not for just keeping them the same. When Reagan lowered rates, lowered them dramatically, we had more money left in the economy, and the economy grew like gangbusters. 20 million jobs were created. Let's be for that. If our message is, we're going to be for revenue neutral, no one's going to knock on a door for you for revenue neutral tax reform. We're not going to win, we're not going to excite our base, and we're not going to be successful. So let's be boldly for what we're for and not be tepid about what we're for. With that, though, we have to decide, is that enough? Are there enough people that are going to go for the message of lower taxes or less regulations or balanced budgets? I think there's a bulk of us that are motivated by that message and will, but there's still not enough. So we have to figure out how to get new people to listen to our message. So what I've been doing is trying not to dilute our message, but to find parts of our message that can appeal to a broader section of people. So I've been talking a lot about the right to privacy, the Fourth Amendment, that if you do, all conservatives love the Second Amendment, that's great, so do I. But if you want to defend the Second Amendment, you got to defend the First Amendment, you got to defend the Fourth Amendment. And so I take that message, and I took that message to CPAC, and I talked primarily about how the government's gotten too big, they're looking at too many of our records, there needs to be probable cause before they look at our records, and I took that message of privacy and was received well at CPAC. I took the exact same message to Berkeley and was received well there. That's the point. There is a right and left connection that we can bring together. Young people aren't so committed to party that they're stuck in one party or the other, that they will be open. You know, President Obama won the youth vote 3-1, but I don't think he's got a permanent hold on the youth vote. I think if we bring to them that message that, you know what you do on your cell phone is none of the government's damn business. So I think the youth vote is open to us, and I think that we can bring new people in. To me, it's consistent with our message. Our message is we defend individual liberty, we defend the Bill of Rights, and we express that in a way and bring that to people who haven't necessarily been listening. The youth vote is frustrated with the president, and I think if you look at polling on it now, his numbers have dropped dramatically with the youth vote. That is open for the taking for us. We need to take our message of believing in all of the Bill of Rights, believing that you have a right to a trial by jury, believing that whatever minority you are, whether it's the color of your skin or the shade of your ideology, that we're the party that will defend you. There was a time in our country where we did dramatically bad things to people of color. The Japanese Americans were interned. African Americans were treated pitifully through Jim Crow. But there's also, you can be a minority in today's day and age when the law is no longer doing that, but you can be a minority because you're a homeschooler or because you believe in God or because you think there's right and wrong and you want to go to a church that says there's right and wrong. That is something that is important, that we defend the rights of a minority, whether you're it's an individual or an ideology or where it comes from. And people would say, well, who out there is trying to get rid of the right to trial by jury? It is going on. We passed a bill 2 years ago, the National Defense Authorization Bill, that allows for an individual, an American citizen, to be detained without trial. And I had this discussion with another Republican senator. I said, do you mean an American citizen could be sent to Guantanamo Bay forever without a trial? And he said, yeah, if they're dangerous. That's the same opinion of the Wall Street Journal, too. They're against me on this, too. They're like, if they're an enemy combatant. I said, well, who gets to decide? You know, who gets to define? It sort of begs the question, who's a terrorist? Who gets to make this definition? Well, the government's put out some characteristics of who you're supposed to report. People who like to pay in cash. People who have multiple guns in their house. Anybody know any of those people? People who have more than 7 days worth of food. I tell my buddy Mike Lee, that's half of Utah. If these are the characteristics of being a terrorist, I damn sure want my lawyer before they send me to Guantanamo Bay. But the thing about it is I think in defending the rights of every individual American citizen, because these could be Arab Americans. You could be an Arab American who's sending an email to a cousin in Lebanon. They say they're a terrorist. Maybe they are. But if you're an American citizen, you got a cousin in Lebanon, shouldn't you get a trial? Shouldn't you be, you know. And I think the way we broaden this message to be not just sort of some esoteric libertarian message is think about the times in our past when we haven't done the right thing. Think about Richard Jewell. You remember him? He was the Olympic bomber, supposedly. He was convicted on TV within hours. Everybody said Richard Jewell was guilty. But think about if he'd have been a black man in 1920 in the South. He wouldn't have gotten a day in court. He would have never been found innocent. And so the times when we've been wrong is when we've been hasty about losing due process, not having a lawyer, not having a right to trial by jury. And that happens to people who are minorities. Martin Luther King said in the Birmingham speech, the letter from the Birmingham jail, he said that an unjust law is one that a majority passes on a minority but does not make binding on themselves. And so that can be the color of your skin. You can be a minority, but you can be a minority because of your ideology as well. We need to be very careful of this. Now, the president passed this and he said, oh, well, don't worry, I'll never use this law. It's like, what world do you live in that you're going to sign a law and say, I'm never going to use it? The president really could have been a hero, and I would have been here today saying he was a hero if he'd have vetoed that bill and held it up. They'd have sent it to him back. We'd have sent it a week later because it was a defense authorization bill. It would have been sent back in a week if he'd had the guts to veto it. But he doesn't have the guts to stand up for the stuff he did say he did believe in. He's now sending to us a nominee that conservatives and civil libertarians don't like. He's a very liberal justice for the First Circuit. He's also written the memo on how, the justification for killing an American citizen. If you are fighting overseas, against America and you get killed, I have no problem with that. You get what you deserve. But if you are overseas and you're aiding and abetting the enemy by doing some computer programming or something, and you're not in the middle of a battle, I really think we should try you for treason. Now, some people say, how are you going to do that? They're never coming home. I would try them. If they don't come home, they would be tried. They would be appointed counsel, convicted of treason, and then really what happens to them isn't as material, but there should be some kind of process. I think it's bad that we point someone to an appellate court who thinks due process occurs when you get a bunch of lawyers together and you have a discussion in the White House. The fact that the president who taught constitutional law could think due process is a bunch of lawyers getting together and discussing something in the White House, there's a lot of things going wrong. The FISA court has no representation for those who are accused. If you're presented from a warrant, Verizon, the phone company, gets a warrant, nobody gets to dispute it. There is no lawyer on your side. You never get to go to a court where there's an adversarial process. These are things we need to be wary of. Right now, we are hoping to get all the way to the Supreme Court. We're in the district court in D.C. Ken Cuccinelli is our lawyer. And we've been assigned to the judge that also has already ruled the NSA program unconstitutional once. I think this is an important question. Can a single warrant apply to hundreds of millions of people's records? Now, the government says, well, once you give them to the phone company, that's just one entity. I don't think you give up a privacy interest when you give your records or you allow the phone company to have a records. You have a privacy agreement with them. They're not allowed to tell your neighbor who you call. So you have a privacy and a property interest still that I think you retain with your bank, with the internet service provider, and with the phone company, whoever it is, with a credit card company. They're not supposed to share it with your neighbors. They shouldn't share it with the government unless they get a judge's warrant. And see, this is interesting because this is what has happened. Now, I have mixed feelings about Edward Snowden, but Edward Snowden was using an email service, and his email service was private. It was encrypted. The government came with a warrant, and they said to the owner, not that they wanted Snowden's email. The owner frankly said, if you've got a warrant, I'll give you Snowden's email. They wanted the encryption keys to all of their email. And so this is really the problem. They're not looking for targeted someone who has probable cause or we have suspicion. They're looking at everybody's records. And people say, well, it's just boring old business records. Who cares? The thing about it is there's a lot of things that can be determined about your life through your business records. 2 Stanford students a couple months ago did a voluntary project, and they asked 500 people to put an app on their phone that collected just the time and length and who you called. And they looked at it like the government would look at phone records, because that's what they're doing. They can look at time and length and duration without listening to any content. They, out of the 500, look at 18 people. 15 out of the 18 they looked at, they could tell what religion you were. Most people, they could tell what diseases you had, what medications you took. All you have to do is look in the white pages and cross-reference numbers for doctors. If you're seeing a rheumatologist and you go every month, you probably have a rheumatologic disease. If you call the hotline for lupus, you may have lupus, or multiple sclerosis, or AIDS. There's a lot of things you don't really think you have to tell your neighbor every one of your medical problems. But there's a lot that can be determined from that. Think about your Visa bill. If I look at your Visa bill, I can tell whether you gamble, whether you smoke, whether you drink, and how much. I can tell what doctors you go to. I can tell what medications you take from your Visa bill. The government maintains that you really have no Fourth Amendment protection of any of your records. Usually what you'll see them say is they'll say, we're going to institute these privacy controls, this and this and this, because we're being nice to you, but the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to your records. This is a real question. I don't know if we'll win. I mean, Scalia, who's one of the best on the court, has actually indicated he's not really in the same place as I am as far as protection of your records. But I think we have gone too far with saying you have no protection of your records and a single warrant. To me, it's one of the fundamental things that we fought the revolution over. James Otis wrote for decades about writs of assistance, and they were concerned because the British soldiers were writing their warrants with no name on them and going into any house because they were looking for revenue from the stamp tax. And it was hard to tell if you paid your stamp tax without rifling through your papers. And so we forbid that with the Fourth Amendment. We said you had to name the person and the place and the items. You had to have probable cause. We separated the police from the judiciary. You had to go to a judge who wasn't part of the police force. But after the Patriot Act, we now let the FBI write their own warrants by the tens of thousands, I think now by the hundreds of thousands. These are things we have to be concerned with. The other good thing about this is an issue that really isn't balanced budgets and taxes, which college students just don't care about. Why? They don't have any money. They've got a bunch of student loans, but they don't care, a lot of them, so much about it. So it's not that they're opposed to our conservative message, but they are more interested in some of this other message. I think if we broaden this message, there's all kinds of potential for our message to reach out to people. The thing that I would conclude with, though, if we want to broaden our message and reach out to new people is that we need to be the party of all individuals and of freedom, not the party of big business. And if we can get that message out that we aren't out there just for rich people and we aren't just concerned with the plutocrats and those who are rich, but the way to say that is that, you know what, when we start reforming government, when we start saying there's not enough money for everybody, the first people we ought to cut off is big business. Stephen Moore's written a lot about this. There's $20 billion in direct payments to big business. The Fortune 100 get on average $200 million apiece. People say, well, that's just piecemeal. There's not much to that. Well, the symbolism of it is very important. One of the richest men in our country started Solyndra. Why in the world will we be giving a loan to one of the richest men in our country? That's just absurd. Of the Department of Energy loans, there's a $20 billion worth of loans. 80% of them were given to Obama bundlers. So why don't we take back the mantle, which Reagan, I think, was able to do, that we are the party of the working class. We are the party that will protect the individual against crony capitalism and big government passing out favors to wealthy people to keep them wealthy. I think if we bring that message to the youth, to minorities that haven't been listening, that we're the defender of the Bill of Rights and of civil rights, and we say, you know what, we are the party of the working man as well. We broaden our message enough that we become the dominant party again. We do it with a smile, we do it with optimism, and I think when that happens again, we'll become the dominant party. Thank you very much.
Senator, we'll take some questions. Raise your hand. We have traveling microphones, and don't speak until you got the microphone. Why don't you start with that lady down there, Lauren?
My name is Barbara Dello, and I want to thank you. I have to say I've seen you before, and I've been very impressed. However, I do have one concern. And it's about foreign policy. I wanted you to ask you to explain a little bit about your foreign policy, and do you have the commitment to ensure a safe world through American strength and leadership?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what Ronald Reagan talked about and projected, and that is peace through strength. And so I think the most important thing we do with federal money is to defend our country. So for any money that comes into our treasury, the number one priority is defending the country. As far as what our foreign policy will be in general terms, I think there's a spectrum. I would say that one extreme would be that we're nowhere, anywhere, and we're always just contained within our country. The other extreme would be that we're everywhere all the time. And I think we're closer to this extreme right now, that we're everywhere all the time and intervening everywhere. I think there is sort of a middle ground. There is a foreign policy school called realism, foreign policy realism. I think that is more of a middle ground, and that's where I like to position myself. There's a Center for National Interest that writes a lot on foreign policy, and I agree with a lot of the things that I read there. I would say that when we decide where we go, during Reagan years, Weinberger wrote something called the Weinberger Doctrine, or some people call it the Reagan Doctrine. And some of this morphed into what they call the Powell Doctrine as well. And that's that when we go to war, we need to have the consensus of the American people. It needs to be voted on appropriately, like the Constitution said, through Congress. When we go to war overwhelmingly to win. We don't go to fight for negotiated settlements. You know, that was one of the things that troubled me about Syria is everyone from the president on down came in and said, oh, we're just fighting to try to get to a negotiated settlement. We weren't going to fight towards any victory. There wasn't any sort of clear-cut national interest they could proclaim. The president said when he was running for office, he said no president should unilaterally go to war without the consent of Congress unless we're in imminent danger. So I had this conversation with him one time. He was at lunch, our small lunch, with the Republican senators, and I asked him, I said, well, you know, with Libya, you went ahead without our permission. And he said, well, Benghazi was in imminent danger of attack from Gaddafi. And I was like, oh, I thought you meant imminent danger of us being attacked, not Benghazi. And here's the thing. The more we get involved, sometimes we're involved on both sides. So the group of senators, some of them, we won't name them, who want to be involved everywhere all the time, they were wanting to give weapons to Gaddafi a year before they were wanting to give weapons to the rebels that overthrew Gaddafi. I say often that with foreign aid, the only thing consistent is that we keep giving money to everybody no matter what they do. So, for example, this week I introduced legislation saying we should not give foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority unless they recognize the right of Israel to exist. But the people who don't like me will mischaracterize this, that I don't believe in any kind of protection of any of our interests around the world, and that's just not true. I believe very strongly what Reagan said is that when he said to our adversaries, he said, don't mistake our reluctance for war for a lack of resolve. So I do believe in peace through strength, but not war through strength. War is a last resort after everything else is exhausted. And if I were in charge, yes, we'll go to war if we have to, but only if we have to. It's not a first choice. It's not something that, and I don't think you want that. There are people in our party who are, I think, so eager to show how strong and manly they are. The president is in charge of the nuclear arsenal that could destroy the world. Could there be a conceivable time to use it? Yes, there could be a conceivable time that we would have to. But do you want someone so eager with war and so reckless that you'd be concerned that they would start a nuclear war? I mean, we've had some very mature people who I think had a mature understanding. Eisenhower was one of those. While I didn't agree with the first George Bush on a lot of economic policy, I think he was a rational man that I didn't fear he was going to start a nuclear war. So these are some things that we have to figure out. And it doesn't mean that we are nowhere any of the time, but it does mean that we maybe shouldn't be everywhere all the time.
How about a question right there?
Thank you, Senator Rand. My name is Mike Geary. Thank you for your defense of the Fourth Amendment. I'd like to ask you about immigration, however. Many of us feel that Ronald Reagan's catastrophe of amnesty for 3 million Americans set the stage for what we're looking at today. There obviously is absolutely no will whatsoever on the part of Congress to secure the border. So where do we go from here? Is the rule of law simply to be set aside now forever?
I think immigration is a tough issue, and we're not all going to agree on it, but I'll sort of give you my take on where I am. We have a problem. We've got 11 million people here who came here illegally and are here illegally. If we do nothing, we'll have another 11 million come. So I'm not for the status quo. I don't think we can just continue doing this. There was a Pew poll not too long ago that asked a bunch of different countries, how many of you would like to go to America and live there? 700 million people said they would come. We can't do that. So I do agree with Milton Friedman, who said you can't have open borders in a welfare state. And we've definitely got the welfare state. So you can't just have a beacon and say everybody come. So do we have to secure the border, not only for sort of the prevention of mass migration, but also for preventing terrorism? You know, we need to know who comes to our country and who leaves. This is a little bit of a side note, but I still don't think we have a good handle on the student visas. Almost all the hijackers were here on student visas. One of the good things that George W. Bush did was a special program looking at 25 countries to be very careful about those countries. Obama let that program go. But with regard to immigration, my point of view is that you have to secure the border first, okay? And the other thing that I think is that when you say that, that's an easy thing to say, but determining whether the border is secure is based on maybe 10 or 15 different parameters, and we could all debate and not have the same opinion about exactly when it's secure. I think that the decision for when the border is secure or if it's adequate shouldn't be left up to the president, particularly this one, because he already thinks the border is secure. So when the bill came up, I ended up, even though I've said a lot of things in favor of immigration reform, I voted against the bill in the Senate for a number of reasons. I had an amendment that I had introduced to it, though, that would have said Congress votes each year on whether the border is more secure. Anything we do, as far as whether we do any legalization of the people here, would be dependent on Congress saying first that the border is secure and becoming increasingly secure. So the way my amendment was called Trust But Verify, and we would have voted for 5 or 6 years in a row. So we would go a year with sort of beginning the process of giving work visas to the 11 million. It would take a while. They'll have to have background checks, and so we'd go through it. And I would give work visas to the 11 million, gradually over time. But it would be dependent on a succession of votes over 5 or 6 years saying the border is becoming more secure. And then exactly how we do it is sort of, I think, the details that I don't know if I know all the answers on that, but we'd begin securing the border, and then there would be an effect of beginning to normalize people. I think, frankly, and this is a conclusion I've come to, and I haven't heard anybody come up with an answer otherwise, that we're not sending 11 million people home. And most of them came to work. Most of them are working people. Let's get them paying taxes, you know. And some people say, well, they broke the law. They shouldn't be rewarded for it. You know, some of them breaking the law, I think, is the fault of big government in the sense that we all, as conservatives, acknowledge big government's not very good at things. Well, they're not very good at the visa system either. In the visa system, 40% of the 11 million came with a valid visa. So they tried to obey the rules, and then they either didn't obey them on purpose or they chose another job. So one of the ways you break your visa, and I don't know the numbers, we've had this debate over what the number is, I don't know if anybody knows, but if you come to pick crops on an ag visa, that's all you're allowed to do. It's about $9 an hour. But let's say every day you go to work, you pass by a sign that says construction workers needed $14 an hour. Well, I think the American thing to do and the capitalist thing to do is to take the $14 an hour, but when you do, you become illegal. And the interesting thing is, even with the Gang of 8 bill in the Senate, they still didn't allow you to switch jobs. If you come to pick crops, you cannot switch jobs. The other thing about the Senate bill that I didn't like was actually it was too restrictive on the work visas. It sets a limit of 100,000 for ag worker visas, the migrant workers that pick crops at 100,000. The estimate is that there's 400,000. And the one thing I won't do is I won't vote for an immigration bill that doesn't fix the problem. Because that's what happened in '86. We did it, and we didn't fix the problem. We never fixed the border, and the illegal immigration continues. But if you set your work visas for migrant workers at 100,000 and 400,000 come every year, you're setting up a recipe for 300,000 illegal immigrants every year. So really you need a much better and bigger work visa program, which means more legal immigration to accommodate it and less illegal immigration. Some are adamant, and I'm not sure where you are. I think you might not be with me on doing anything with the work visas, but that's where I am. I think many Republicans would allow workers but aren't ready for voters necessarily. And so I think that's an in-between position on it that might happen. I don't know that anything's going to end up happening this year. But I do think as Republicans, we have to change our attitude. If our attitude is one of purposely or unpurposely of sort of animosity towards Hispanic population. And the problem is that many people who are in the Hispanic community who are here legally and may well be citizens, they may well be dating somebody or their daughter's dating somebody or they go to church with somebody. There's a great deal of sympathy for those who are here legally with not deporting those who are overstaying their visas. I think there has to be some way of figuring that out. But the one thing we have to do is transmit that we do care about these people as individuals and that we're not against the Hispanic population and that we do value the culture and what they've added to our culture, frankly. I mean, my ancestors came from England and Germany and brought part of their culture here. I think there's no reason why part of the Hispanic culture can't be brought and imbue our American culture with better things or with good things. So, but it's not an easy answer, and I probably made half of you happy and half of you unhappy. So.
Take a question here.
Hey, Senator Paul, my name is Matthew. One of the issues or one of the things that you're really focused on is reaching out to non-traditional or folks who aren't necessarily conservative or Republican, and you're working on issues like school choice and sentencing reform. Can you talk a little bit about the feedback that you're getting from those communities and what it's like to go and speak to those types of populations and,
Right.
and what you're seeing?
You know, I think we're getting a good response. I've introduced a series of bills to try to reform our criminal justice. And the war on drugs has had a disproportionate effect on people of color. If you look at people in prison, 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown, mostly for nonviolent drug crimes. But if you look at drug usage, white kids are using drugs at an equal rate to black or brown kids. But they're just not getting convicted because it's easier to convict poor people in the cities. And I'm not for saying, oh, everybody do whatever the hell you want with drugs, but I am for saying, you know what, if kids make mistakes, let's don't put them in jail for 10 years and 20 years. There are people in jail for selling marijuana for 55 years. You can kill somebody in Kentucky and be out in 12, all right, or eligible for parole in 12 years. And so I think we need to have a different attitude. As a Christian, we believe in redemption. I believe in a second chance. So I have a friend whose brother grew marijuana plants 30 years ago. He now has an MBA, but he's a house painter because it's hard to get a job if you're a convicted felon. He also can't vote. So I testified in Frankfurt beside the president of the NAACP saying you should get your voting rights back. If you've served your time, you should get your voting rights back. And you know, not everybody's going to agree with that either, but it is opening doors for me. And I'll be speaking at the Urban League in July to their national meeting in Cincinnati talking about some of these things. But it's criminal justice. Here's another thing that I wasn't aware of. Let's say you do a nonviolent crime and you go to jail for 2 or 3 years. If you have kids and you are not married, you're paying child support. What does it do? It adds up in prison. So a guy gets out of prison and he owes $3,000 in child support payment. You know what happens if he doesn't pay? We put him back in jail. Now, should dads pay? Yeah, if I don't pay, I should probably go to jail because I've got money. But a guy who gets out of prison is going to make $9 an hour, is never going to see $3,000 in his whole life probably. So you got to have some kind of accommodation rather than putting them back in jail to allow them to pay over time. These communities have poverty and then drugs and then poverty and jail and everything mixed together, and they never get out from under this trap. If we're not conscious of the problems that people have in their lives and try to fix them, they're never going to open up to us as voters. I've also taken the issue you mentioned of school choice. I've talked about that in Chicago. I was in Milwaukee with the home of the vouchers a couple weeks ago. I'm also talking about economic freedom zones. Jack Kemp talked about enterprise zones. I think they never were quite enough. He started with a good concept, but they never worked because there wasn't enough reduction. What we've done is said in a high unemployment area, we'll reduce the corporate income tax to 5%, personal income tax to 5%, capital gains to 0%, and reduce the payroll tax for the worker and the employer. And for Detroit, it'd be a $1.3 billion stimulus. And the reason I go ahead and accept the word stimulus, a lot of conservatives, we've complained and complained about the other side doing stimulus and stuff. It's a word we should just co-opt. We should take the word and use it for our purposes and say, look, we're going to give a stimulus to Detroit, but it's going to be a stimulus by leaving their own money in Detroit. And under our tax plan, it'd be $1.3 billion for Eastern Kentucky, which has been poor for years, and they've been taxing you all across America and sending money to Appalachia. It doesn't work. And one of the reasons a government stimulus doesn't work is they choose who they give it to. So I might say, Christopher, you'd be good in business. Here's $100,000. Go create jobs. Well, 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So if the government gives it to Christopher, 9 out of 10 times we pick the wrong person. But if you do it through reduction in taxes, and Christopher already has a business in Appalachia and has 10 employees, I'm not choosing to give it to him. I'm just reducing his taxes. So I'm giving it to the person the community's already voted for because their business is already thriving and their business gets bigger. But it's a direct response, and people want, it's not enough to say to Detroit, capitalism will float all boats and everybody will get richer. It is true, but it's not enough. It's not enough for people to consider voting for you unless you say, I'm coming to Detroit and this is what I'm going to do for you. And frankly, the Democrats haven't done a very good job for Detroit. And so maybe there will be a certain percentage of voters who open up and say, you know what, here are Republicans coming to an area where they got 3% of the vote and saying how they'll help us. Our schools are the pits. They're going to help us with our schools. All our young men are in jail. They're going to help us with saying, you know what, we're not going to make drugs legal, but we're going to try to figure out a reasonable way to get people back out of prison and back into the workforce and have consideration for these people's future.
Question in the back. There. Can we get a microphone to that gentleman? Yes, that gentleman.
Good morning, Senator, and thank you for coming. You mentioned going to Berkeley and taking the message out there. Well, I happen to be originally from San Francisco, so I know something about that area and the attitudes thereof. You also mentioned something about the Fourth Amendment and its apparent evisceration. So I'd like to put the following question to you and, frankly, to the rest of you in this room. Regarding that, we have seen the increased militarization of our civilian police forces. They got body armor, M16s, the whole thing. You know, the cops are leading with a SWAT team first, breaking into Mayor Chai Calvo's home up there in Berwyn Heights. It's just amazing some of the things I think we're seeing. I think we'll all agree. Now, we oppose that today. However, I noticed something interesting. A lot of us did not oppose it during previous administrations, especially those headed by those with an R after their name. So I'm wondering, and by the way, this is going back even 30 years. Should we not be opposing this evisceration of the Fourth Amendment no matter who's in office?
Absolutely. We need to be more consistent. But in all fairness, there are many people in this room who have criticized Republicans too. So I mean, we do need to be more consistent. But I think your point is well made on the over-criminalization from the federal level, but also the over-use of military force in our police and militarization of our different agencies. We have 48 federal agencies with SWAT teams. When they went into Gibson Guitar, the Fish and Wildlife were armed, you know, because they didn't have the right permit for importing or something. And they go in and ransack the place. There was an organic food store where the USDA went with their SWAT team and closed them down for the crime of selling milk directly from the cow. So there is all kinds of things. So my staff showed me the other day, the one thing we put on Facebook that's gotten more hits than anything else was we had a group of a SWAT team invading a house, and we made up the headline, which was, "Next time pay your library dues fines on time," you know. Department of Education actually has a SWAT team. They went in and arrested a guy, handcuffed him for 6 hours and interrogated him because they were accusing his wife of doing something with student loan. It wasn't even him. It was the wrong person, but they held him for 6 hours in handcuffs. So we have gone too far, and this is something we need to be very careful of. There was a story yesterday of the police going into a house. The kids ran and hid in the closet. They handcuffed mom and dad. And it was the wrong house and the wrong people. But they kept them handcuffed for hours, ransacked the house, kept asking them about a person they'd never heard of. And it was the wrong house. The guy hadn't lived there in a couple of years or something that they were looking for. So we have gone too far. You know, the thing out in Nevada, you know, I don't know the right or wrongness of the whole dispute, but I do think that the federal land ought to be owned locally and that the governor should be in charge of it. And you think about it, you know, I have no sympathy for the whatever the cult was in Waco, but that guy went and got groceries. If he was breaking the law or if he was doing something wrong with children, they could have arrested him at any point in time without sending tanks and military there. If a religious cult believes in apocalypse and they're survivalists, probably not a good idea to show up with tanks. You're going to have a bad outcome. You know, so but some of that's common sense, and I was kind of glad. Hopefully, they will. If Bundy is in the wrong and hasn't paid his taxes, and he's lost in court, hopefully somebody gets him when he goes to the grocery store to arrest him, rather than having a big confrontation with all these federal agents. So, but you're right, and but we've gone too far. There were, I think, originally in the Constitution like 3 or 4 crimes. Most of the things that we've made crimes really should be handled at the state level, not the federal level.
This lady right here. Yes, you. Green. Yes, one to you.
Probably did without a microphone. Good morning, Senator. I'm Sarah Perry, retired Army officer.
She's coming with the mic right now, Ms. Perry.
Good morning, Senator. I'm Sarah Perry, retired Army officer. My concern is the safety of our kids who go overseas and put their lives on the line. They have unreasonable, irrational rules of engagement they have to abide by, and we lose too many of them. We're being sent to places that do not coincide with our national interest. After 30 years in the Army, top secret clearance, I know what I'm talking about there. This is not acceptable for the American people, but most of them don't understand it and don't realize. What is your position on bringing those troops back and doing what they really ought to be doing, and that is defending America, i.e. making sure the borders are secure? My father rode the border near El Campo, California, and helped protect the border. If they did it back then, why can't we do it now?
That's a very good point. And I think that our soldiers are all brave, all volunteers, and they will fight and go where they're told. But the thing is they shouldn't be expected to be policemen, around the world. They shouldn't expected to be, building nations around the world, particularly in countries that are going to be very, very difficult to make nations out of. I do think that we, after 9/11, needed to do something, and I think we needed to go after bin Laden, and it was right, and I would have voted to go into Afghanistan. I think we got a little distracted in Iraq, and I'm not so sure that there really was a national interest there. But with Afghanistan, I think there was. But I think we should have gone in, fought to win, and then really, I don't know about remaining for decade after decade. Afghanistan really, somewhat like Iraq, is not really a country. It's a collection of different tribal regions that really often don't speak the same language and don't even have loyalties to the national government. The western part of Afghanistan speaks Farsi and is probably more associated with Iran. The northern parts speak another dialect. There's the Pashtun region, and really they're all more allied with their tribal leaders than they are with any government, any central government. But I think we've lost our sense of purpose there, and I hate to see any soldiers dying over there now. And so I have been trying to urge the president to come home from Afghanistan.
Thank you, Senator, for coming today. Question is, let's say the GOP takes the Senate back and retains the House. Is there a realistic plan to have a veto-proof bill that deals with the ACA?
If you give us a veto-proof number, sure. It's unlikely we'd get to veto-proof. It's unlikely we even get to 60. It would be, I would say it's 50-50 that we could get the Senate, and that would mean probably 50, 51, maybe 52. But even that's unknown. But if we get to that, can we get a veto? That's not veto-proof. That's not even enough to repeal Obamacare. So we would have to then get 8 Democrats to vote with us. See, the extraordinary thing about the passage of Obamacare was having 60 votes and controlling the House and the presidency. They controlled all 3 bodies with 60. I don't think the Republicans have had that since like 1920 or something. It's an extraordinary time when you have it. So while I will always vote to repeal Obamacare, I'm also realistic enough to know that there might be some in-between things that we might be able to do. One thing that I think I'm surprised they haven't begged us to do yet is the 30-hour work week, saying that employees are full-time at 30 versus 40. They say that costs 2.5 million jobs, and there's some vulnerable Democrats. I'm surprised they're not begging us to fix that. We have a bill to fix that. And what does it do? It makes Obamacare less bad. It doesn't really, fix it, but it makes it less bad. If they beg us to fix that, or if we have the numbers to fix that, I would do that. Medical devices tax is a possibility to repeal that. Expanding HSAs would expand a health savings account, expands a real marketplace for health care. And if you could make it about 20% of insurance products an HSA can be associated with, I'd let them be associated with every product to make it easier to save for your deductible, save for your premium, and you could get higher and higher deductibles and you get more of a marketplace if you had HSAs. So I think anything they want done, we should expand HSAs. And trying to think if there's anything else. Those are less heavy lifts. The other thing that we could possibly do, I think, and I've started talking a little bit about, is why don't we, if they love Obamacare so much, why don't we make it voluntary? And that's, I don't know if we'll get there or not, but there's things that we could try to do. Right now, outright repeal isn't going to happen under the current situation, but even if we take over, unless we get 60. And if we get 60, my prediction is he will veto things that get rid of the individual mandate or get rid of Obamacare completely. I'm not saying we don't send it to him, and I think we will send it to him and make him veto it, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But veto-proof, we would have to have 2/3 to override a veto. So we're looking at 66. So we'd be looking at a pickup of 21 or 2. That's never happened. So I don't think we're getting there, but I don't think we give up on the fight. I think also Obamacare is so bad economically that it's sort of still in the process of slowly unraveling and being unworkable. The one thing that's going to really make it unworkable is a lot of these people have been given subsidized insurance. It's great. I can go to the doctor now. They start going, but almost all of them have high deductibles, like $6,000 deductibles. If you can't buy insurance, what are the odds you're going to be paying any of that $6,000? So they're still going to be non-payers. The hospitals, which much to my regret actually supported Obamacare, are going to find out they're going to get all these people they thought were going to be payers who have insurance. They're still going to be non-payers. And as that adds up, and then as we find that young people didn't sign up enough for it, premiums are going to rise. I think we're going to find out some of that before the election. I'm hoping that influences the outcome of the election some. But I think that ultimately Obamacare is not really workable and has its own sort of inherent problems that may well bring it down. But it's going to be difficult for us politically. But it is the number one issue that will change the election is they promise you could keep your doctor if you liked your doctor, and it's not true. That's upsetting a lot of people. And the fact that you have guaranteed diet counseling, but you can't go, to Sloan Kettering or to Harvard or to MD Anderson for your cancer treatment isn't particularly comforting, that you have diet counseling when you get cancer and can't go to a center. So I think there's a lot of problems. It's made North Carolina in play, Louisiana, Arkansas, a bunch of states are in play, Alaska. So, but we got to win all of them. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Obviously, they love you here. We want you to come back again. It's a pleasure working with you. This man's helped out the Leadership Institute in many ways. I'm happy to say we had a number of people in his campaign when he was elected. As a token of our appreciation, let me present to you one of our Adam Smith neckties.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I invite everybody to join us on June 4th for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. Our speaker will be former Senator Jim DeMint, who is now president of the Heritage Foundation. Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast memberships are now available for purchase online at leadershipinstitute.org/breakfast. Well, thank you. For $100, you get 12 breakfasts for the price of 10. Members also receive an exclusive Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast name tag. I invite anyone interested in a tour of our building and our annex next door, which are interesting to see. I invite you to come up here and meet with Brandon Patterson. Here's Brandon Patterson after the breakfast. Brandon is a donor relations officer here. He'll be happy to help answer any questions that you might have. As you leave, I invite you to pass by my assistant, Kathy Graham. She's standing near the elevator, and she's ready to sell you Adam Smith attire, ladies' scarves, cufflinks, other Adam Smith attire. Thank you all very much. Good day.